It all started innocently enough. My wife, Laura, and I were packing away some old boxes in the attic when she came across a dusty photo album from her college days. She laughed as she flipped through the pages, reminiscing about parties and friends I had heard of but never met. Then, her laughter wavered as her fingers froze on a particular page. "What is it?" I asked, leaning closer. "Nothing," she said too quickly, shutting the album. That moment planted the seed of doubt in my mind, though I couldn't have guessed what was coming. A few nights later, the topic of past relationships came up during dinner with friends. Someone joked about college flings and Laura's face flushed. She excused herself to get more wine, but the unease in her expression lingered with me. After our friends left, I pressed her about it. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked. She hesitated, biting her lip. "It's ancient history, Mark. It doesn't matter," but it did matter. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. After that, I couldn't let it go. The breaking point came when I discovered a series of old emails buried in her college email account. She had left it open on her laptop one evening. The emails were between her and someone named Eric, a guy she had always referred to as just a study buddy from her university days. But the messages told a different story. A story of late-night meetings, stolen kisses, and even a weekend trip that coincided with the time we had been dating exclusively. When I confronted her, she broke down. "It was a mistake," she sobbed. "It was before we were serious." "We were serious enough that I thought we had an understanding," I said, my voice trembling with betrayal. Her tears only deepened my sense of loss. This wasn't just about something that happened decades ago. It was about trust, about the foundation of our entire relationship. I had built a life with her. 2 kids, a house, countless shared memories, and now that foundation felt irreparably cracked. For days, I grappled with what to do. I loved her, or at least a version of her I thought I knew. But how could I move forward knowing that she had lied by omission for 20 years? Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal. In the end, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told her I couldn't stay. Our kids were shocked, of course, and so were our friends. "Why now?" people asked, baffled that a marriage so long-standing could end over something so far in the past. But they didn't understand. It wasn't about the affair itself. It was about the years of deception, the life we had built on a half-truth. As I packed my bags and walked out of the home we had shared for 2 decades, I felt an odd mixture of grief and relief. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep living a lie. Now, months later, I'm learning to rebuild. It's not easy, but I've found some solace in the truth. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living authentically, even if it's painful. Some might say I overreacted. But for me, trust isn't just something you can glue back together. Once it's shattered, it's never the same. The first few weeks after I left were a blur. I stayed in a small motel at first, the kind of place where the wallpaper peels and the hum of the air conditioner drowns out your thoughts. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake, replaying everything over and over in my head. The laughter we shared, the promises we made, the betrayal I never saw coming. Laura tried to reach out. She left voicemails, sent long texts, and even wrote me a letter, something she hadn't done since we were newlyweds. The letter was full of apologies and explanations. She claimed the affair with Eric was a fleeting mistake, something that hadn't meant anything in the long run. She begged me to reconsider, for the sake of our family, for the years we had spent together. I wanted to believe her. Part of me even missed her. But every time I thought about going back, a wave of anger and sadness washed over me. How could I ever trust her again? If she could keep this secret for so long, what else might she have hidden from me? The hardest part was telling the kids. Our son, Ryan, was in his final year of college, and our daughter, Emily, had just started her first semester. They both came home the weekend after I moved out, confused and hurt. "Why now, Dad?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with frustration. "You've been together forever. Why throw it all away over something that happened before we were even born? Emily, quieter by nature, just sat there with tears streaming down her face. "Can't you just forgive her?" she whispered. "People make mistakes." I didn't have the words to explain it in a way they'd understand. To them, Laura and I had always been the picture of stability. They didn't see the cracks, the quiet erosion of trust that had started the moment I found those emails. All I could do was promise them that I still loved them and that this wasn't their fault. Over time, the practicalities of divorce took over. Splitting assets, selling the house, deciding how to handle holidays. It was exhausting. Laura and I tried to remain civil for the sake of the kids, but there were moments when the bitterness crept in. Once, during a particularly heated argument about dividing our savings, she snapped, "You're throwing away everything we built because of something that didn't even matter." I stared at her, incredulous. It mattered to me. It mattered because I thought you were someone who would never betray me, not even before we said, "I do." Eventually, we settled into a new normal. Laura kept the house, and I rented a small apartment downtown. The kids visited on weekends, but the dynamic was different. They were careful not to take sides, but I could tell they resented me for appending the family. I couldn't blame them. I resented myself sometimes too, but amidst the loneliness and regret, there was also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in years, I had the space to reflect on who I was outside of my marriage. I picked up old hobbies, reading, hiking, even learning to play guitar. I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from over the years. Slowly, I started to rebuild. One day, while organizing my apartment, I came across an old photo of Laura and me from our honeymoon. We looked so young, so happy. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. That chapter of my life was over, but it had taught me something invaluable. Trust is the cornerstone of any relationship. Without it, everything else crumbles. I'm still not sure if I made the right decision. Maybe I should have tried harder to forgive, to rebuild. But in the end, I chose to value my own sense of integrity and self-worth. And for now, that's enough. Months turned into a year, and life slowly began to reshape itself around the void left by my marriage. The apartment started to feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home. I bought new furniture, hung a few paintings, and even adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt named Charlie who became my constant companion. The pain of betrayal didn't vanish, but it dulled over time. Therapy helped. My therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Karen, guided me through the tangled emotions I hadn't dared to confront. She helped me see that my decision to leave wasn't just about the cheating. It was about reclaiming my sense of self after years of quietly compromising my boundaries and values. Laura and I maintained a cordial relationship for the sake of the kids. We spoke on the phone occasionally, usually about logistics or updates on Ryan and Emily. There were moments when I caught glimpses of the woman I had once loved, a shared joke, a kind word. But I knew we could never go back to what we were. Ryan graduated and landed a job in a neighboring city, and Emily thrived in college, joining clubs and making friends. They still struggled with the divorce, but our relationship slowly began to heal. Ryan called me one night, out of the blue, to say he understood why I left. "You deserve to be happy, Dad," he said. "It's taken me a while, but I get it now." Emily took longer to come around. She was closer to her mother, and the divorce had shaken her deeply. But eventually, she started visiting me more often, bringing stories of her classes and adventures. One night, as we watched a movie together, she leaned over and said, "I'm proud of you, you know, for standing up for yourself." That moment meant everything to me. As the second year of my new life began, I found myself drawn to the idea of dating again. It felt strange, almost surreal, to imagine opening my heart to someone after everything I'd been through. But I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. I started small, joining a local hiking group and attending community events. It wasn't about finding someone right away. It was about reconnecting with people and rediscovering the parts of myself that had been dormant for years. One crisp autumn afternoon, during a group hike, I met Claire. She was warm, witty, and refreshingly honest, a divorced mother of two who had her own stories of heartbreak and resilience. We bonded over our shared experiences, and what started as casual conversations turned into long walks, coffee dates, and eventually something more. Claire wasn't Laura, and that was a good thing. She didn't shy away from difficult conversations, and her transparency felt like a breath of fresh air. Being with her didn't erase the pain of my past, but it reminded me that love could be built on a foundation of mutual respect and honesty. One evening, as we sat on a park bench watching Charlie chase falling leaves, Claire turned to me and said, "You're stronger than you think, Mark. You've been through hell, but here you are, still standing, still open to love." Her words stayed with me. I don't know what the future holds. I've learned that life is unpredictable, that people are flawed, and that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But I've also learned that healing is possible, that love can be rediscovered, and that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most meaningful growth. I'll always carry the scars of what happened, but they don't define me anymore. They're just part of my story, a story that's still being written as the years passed. The weight of what had happened between Laura and me began to feel less like a burden and more like a chapter in a much larger book. Life moved on, as it always does. Claire and I continued to grow closer, and while I approached our relationship cautiously, I found myself slowly lowering the walls I had built. One day, while visiting Ryan in his new apartment, he asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you regret it, Dad? Leaving Mom?" I set down my coffee and thought carefully before answering. "I regret the pain it caused you and Emily," I said honestly, "but I don't regret standing up for what I needed. I loved your mom, and part of me always will. But love without trust isn't enough to sustain a marriage." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I get it now. I didn't back then, but I do now." It took me going through my own breakup to really understand. His words brought a bittersweet comfort. Knowing that my choices had helped shape how he approached his own relationships felt like a small victory amidst the struggles. Emily, too, had grown in ways that amazed me. She had graduated from college and started a career in environmental advocacy, a passion she had nurtured since high school. One weekend, during a visit, she brought up the divorce for the first time in years. "You know," she said, stirring her tea, "for the longest time, I was angry at you for leaving. I thought you should have stayed and tried harder to fix things." Her honesty stung, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. "But now I realize you were teaching us something important, about boundaries, about self-respect. I think I understand why you did it, even if it hurt." Tears welled in my eyes as I reached across the table to hold her hand. "Thank you for saying that, Em. It means more than you know." Meanwhile, my relationship with Laura had settled into a kind of distant friendship. We spoke occasionally, usually about the kids or family milestones, but there was no lingering bitterness. At one point, during Ryan's birthday celebration, she pulled me aside. "I want you to know," she said softly, "I regret what I did back then. I've regretted it for years. I'm sorry for how it all turned out." Her words, though late, felt genuine. I nodded. "I know, Laura. And I'm sorry, too, for the hurt we caused each other. It wasn't forgiveness in the traditional sense, but it was enough. We both had our lives now, and dwelling on the past would only keep us tethered to pain." As for Claire, she became more than just a partner. She became my confidant, my best friend, and eventually my wife. The decision to remarry didn't come lightly, but it came with clarity. Claire and I had built something different, something honest. Our wedding was a simple affair, held in a sunlit garden with only our closest family and friends. Ryan gave a toast that made me laugh and cry in equal measure. And Emily surprised me by walking me down the aisle alongside Claire's children. That day wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a testament to resilience, to the idea that life can break you but also heal you if you let it. Now, as I sit on the porch of the home Claire and I share, watching Charlie snooze at my feet, I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Peace. Life isn't perfect, and it never will be, but it's good. And for the first time in years, that's enough. Looking back, I see that my journey wasn't about ending a marriage. It was about finding myself again. And in that process, I discovered that even after betrayal and heartbreak, love and happiness are still possible. They don't erase the scars, but they make them easier to carry. And in the end, that's what matters most.